And welcome back to the podcast. This is the 10-Minute Life Coach Redux, redone, life number 3, 4, 5. Not quite sure, but what we're doing right now, this is episode 3 of the after version, 150 episodes in of the official podcast, even with the 5-year hiatus. And we're calling this what I learned from 150 episodes of the 10-Minute Life Coach. We're doing this as a recording, as a way to sort of put down on audio, so we can later put down on paper things, lessons learned into some sort of after-action report. Probably a book, maybe just one short after-action report once we edit down all the ums and ahs and rambles. If you're used to listening to this podcast as a podcast, well, this is a third installment that's not quite as a podcast, so this will not be a 10-minute life lesson that you can take along with you and use immediately. There will be some lessons along the way inside the rambles and rants and ums and ahs, but this is not so much about time. This is about getting the message down, getting the words recorded. So thank you for continuing to listen to the podcast. Still plenty of people downloading and listening to the podcast. In fact, the very first episode that we did, that was the after show version, was a record number of downloads, believe it or not. So maybe people saw the announcement, saw it coming down, and went to see what would happen afterwards when I was still in the feed, and bam, still in the feed. So we expect to lose listeners along the way, and we expect to lose listeners along the way of the explanation. It's been 2 minutes of me talking so far. So thank you for listening this far. Thank you for paying attention to what's going on. If you're looking for quick motivation, we still have plenty of it. In fact, it's even quicker motivation. At the website, yourbetteryou.info, you will find quick, simple, easier to digest information and things to get your life on the better track. It's not quite as detailed, not quite as refined as this one, but it's meant to be simple. It's meant to be just to get you to be a better you, just like that. Visit yourbetteryou.info for the podcast, Steps to Your Better You. Also a way to get the book, Quick Steps to Your Better You. Obviously, I'm not all that creative in names, but it worked out for that part. And just get the updated information as we're going to start posting there on a regular basis again. Meanwhile, for this third edition of this after show, this after action report, this is based on some chapter ideas, some notes I put down for what to do for the book I thought this was going to be. Obviously, it's not created yet, so we won't know what it is until it is. But what this is the third chapter or third installment listing, no particular order, as we've said over and over again, on how I thought the book was going to be laid out. And this is the third lesson learned in doing 150 episodes of the 10-Minute Life Coach podcast. And that lesson is change is necessary and good for business. Maybe it's 2 lessons, but that's the title that I came up with. Seemed like it worked for that. Now, the main theme stayed the same throughout the entire broadcast of this podcast. The format got better as it was needed. The changes were definitely needed, changes made as they popped up, and it made things better for the actual podcast, the presentation, for people listening, and the workings of the business. Now, the caveat on that is the business model around this podcast never really took off the way it needed to or like I would have liked it to. So that's a good reason why the podcast no longer exists, at least not for reals in this after action form that may turn into something else. But business was better for the changes that put into the podcast. Business, like I said, wasn't rolling in cash, wasn't just flowing like water. But the business of doing the podcast and the business side of the podcast did increase as changes were made. And that's a good fundamental life lesson in general and good fundamental business lesson, that the plan you start off with will, of course, never continue on that same track for the full duration of the life of the entity. They say in war, your battlefield plans are essentially useless once you actually hit the field of battle and the first bullet flies. And that's essentially what happened. Starting this thing was a learning process and learning how to do it. The learning process of learning just how hard it was nearly broke me. Bringing it back was a ordeal, although once I brought it back, I realized I didn't have to do it as hard as I did before, so it was easier to do. And then the final act, if you will, the final change up, where I went sort of back to the old and brought it into the new, where I worked on produced pieces and had some audio cues, things, because that's what the kids do these days, to make things work a little better. I was getting a lot of great positive feedback with the new changes, which were, of course, going back to the old, and then we had to let the whole thing go down. While change is never good just for change's sake, just to change things because they can be done, Sometimes changing things because it can be done or changing things on a path to something is a great thing to say. Obviously, what I just said was a contradiction, but hear me out for a second. Maybe things are getting stale or not getting stale, but you're afraid it could get stale, so you do some slight changes. That's a great thing to do. But changing things just because it's Wednesday and things are perfect, but you just want to throw something out there without any idea where it's going is not a good idea. Change is always necessary, or I should say change is usually necessary because you have to keep up with the times. But if something is literally working and not broken, you should always think about what exactly you're going to change and make sure that you're not going to fix something that isn't broken, i.e. break something that is not needing to be broken. Sometimes things are working exactly the way they should, and you should leave those things alone and tweak on the things that aren't working so well. If you have a project that's going so great, try looking for something that's not running so well on its own because that might need your more attention. That means you can put less attention on that good thing because change is necessary. Just maybe not for the thing that you're doing right now. And the flip side, things will probably never continue on an infinite path of greatness on any sort of project, on any sort of thing you're doing. So change is always something that should be in the back of your mind, something you should keep on hand to do. As we have said, and it'll be real repetitive, very repetitive in these things, change just to change stuff isn't going to do you any good. You have to document what it is you're changing, and you have to think about what you expect to get from that change. And once you find out what you actually receive, make sure you have a way to go backwards just in case you have to go backwards. Sometimes the change you make does not give you positive results. Sometimes it gives you serious negative results. Sometimes it gives you fits and sputs that you have to go back to the beginning and do it the old school way, or things don't get done moving forward. Change is something you should never fear. Change is something you should embrace whenever the time comes. But change is something that is very, very serious and very important to moving forward. The changes you make must be documented. The changes you intend to make must have a plan of action and intended purpose. And the changes that go into process must be able to be managed so you don't lose out on whatever control you already have. Now, let's say you do that change and business gets up. You get an increase in whatever it is you're measuring. Increase in listeners for the case of this podcast, increase of subscribers, increase of people visiting off sites, applying to calls of action, increase in cash, which didn't quite happen the way it should have. The change that I saw in the work that I was doing caused some ripples into the business life of this podcast, because the podcast is not just for fun. It was for learning, it is for teaching you folks, but it also is a business. It's a self-sustaining entity, or was meant to be. So as I reacted to things that came in, I got mostly positive reactions coming back. When feedback would come in, good or bad or indifferent, I would react to it. I'd give a response. I'd say thank you for the feedback. If it was not so great, I would say very good thanks to people who gave great feedback. I would explain why what we were doing is why we're doing it. And if it's something that somebody didn't like, I would take the suggestion and put it to heart. If it was something that could really be done to change, we would try something to tweak it down the line. If it was just someone trolling, we would say thank you and then let them keep on trolling, because trolls got to troll. But the changes that came up in the business works made it a great business environment to work with for people, for clients, for just plain listeners, because people would respond to various things inside of the program. They would hear the difference and then let me know what was good, what was not so good. And trust me, it's easy to find me and easy to be heard and easy to hear what was so good and what was not so good in the process. So with all that put out, the big lesson, as stated in the chapter name, or the proposed chapter name, is change is necessary and good for business. Change is necessary because change is the only thing consistent in life. There is no guarantee that your great thing going right now, as perfect as it may seem, can go that way indefinitely. Something's going to happen. Something's going to have to be tweaked or adjusted to keep it going, if not majorly overhauled as time or technology or personnel changes. And change is good for business. Businesses can get stagnant. Businesses can get stuck. Businesses cannot do so well. And that means something has to change to bring more people in. Something has to change to bring a better focus on what you're producing. Maybe the product's not so great, so you need to upgrade the product. Maybe the customer base is not so great, so you need to upgrade the customer base. Maybe your delivery is not getting it to people in a timely manner, and maybe your rates that you're charging are throwing you off. You might be charging too much, you might be charging too little, and because the prices don't fit the market that you're targeting, the people aren't responding to that. So change is good for business, making it able to charge more for greater goods, and of course, bring more in to keep the business alive. That's going to do it for idea number 3. If you want more great things in personal development, although much, much shorter, check out the website yourbetteryou.info. That is the new home for all things personal development from me, J. Cleveland Payne. I'm also all over the internets. Find me at my website, jclevelandpayne.net, my personal website. Also doing a lot more posting to Medium, a lot more writing to get more things there. Trying to reach out to my audience, if you will. So look for J. Cleveland Payne on Medium or find me via the links at the website. Social media, I'm J. Cleveland Payne pretty much everywhere you're looking for. So do that as well. And email me at jclevelandpayne@gmail.com. You can do all those things to reach out and talk about what's going on. I did get one response so far, one direct response, a phone call from my good friend Mikkel, who, of course, was the inspiration for bringing the podcast back, the inspiration for episode 150, the episode where we hit the milestone and didn't quit. And we talked about this whole after action thing. And he was rather sympathetic to what was going on. He's going through some stuff right now. So thoughts and prayers out to him. Things are going well. He's going through some things that are really positive, a lot of great things going on. So he's juggling a lot of balls right now. But he understood exactly what was going on and how things worked out. In fact, the one thing he's not doing right now is kicking off a podcast, because it's one thing that him and the family can't quite manage in the time that's going on right now. So that's understandable. He understands being busy, being crazy, and seeing a project that was supposed to be more fruitful not be as fruitful. That, of course, not quite grammatically correct, but I just said it. But if you want to reach out and talk to me about the things I have done, things I am doing, things I might do in the future, especially if you want to collaborate on something going on forward, reach out to me. The best way is via email at Cleveland like the city, PAYNE @gmail.com, or hit me up through one of the websites. There's links there as well. Hopefully this hiatus, this real hiatus of the show, will bring about time for more other shows. That's also not grammatically correct. I'm going to launch the Mastering Your Message podcast very soon. We have 10 episodes already ready, and we're trying to work the back end to get the website up to speed so we can go ahead and do this. And Business Questions Answered Here, my new favorite baby, although it as well, not quite as successful as I thought it would be from the launch. But it is the baby that I'm going to definitely put a lot of focus into. It's my new cutest baby, and I want that one to succeed. Those will come out with some new episodes very soon as well. And maybe some revamping, because that's been revamped about 4 times in 20 episodes. The change is good, it's necessary, and it's good for business. So that's the message there. If my message wasn't too rambly and wasn't too crazy, I hope you come back next week for whatever comes about in the next supposed chapter of the book, detailing what happened after 150 episodes of this podcast. In the meantime, thank you for being a part of anything that I have done, created, or put out there on the internet. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know. Just make sure you let me know how you're doing, because I love you guys, and hopefully you guys like me a little bit too. Thanks so much. And this thing will go on as long as I think it will. So 3 weeks in, probably 12 weeks total. We'll see what happens next week from the after show, the aftermath from the 150 lessons I've learned, or not quite 150 lessons, but the lessons I've learned from 150 episodes of the 10-Minute Life Coach podcast.